Welcome to The Debate. The introduction of iPadOS 26.2 Beta 1 marks the start of a new development cycle, bringing a raft of changes that ripple across the entire Apple ecosystem, impacting everything from, health metrics to our daily organizational tools.
Indeed, and this isn't just some minor maintenance drop, it's a significant update. We're talking 8 gigabytes, which demands considerable free storage, something like 15 to 16 gigabytes during the installation itself. And it signals, that we're probably about 6 to 8 weeks away from seeing these features hit the public release.
That size, it definitely implies significant architectural change, which leads directly to our central question today. Does iPadOS 26.2 Beta 1 represent a significant user-focused upgrade based on meaningful practical gains? Or is it primarily a minor refinement release, maybe characterized more by cosmetic changes and, frankly, fragmented feature implementation? My argument is that this update addresses critical, long-standing functional deficits. It delivers substantive utility that genuinely enhances the core user experience.
See, I come at it from a slightly different angle. While, some underlying fixes are welcome, the overall execution feels more like Apple is cleaning up technical debt rather than laying out a clear, cohesive vision for the future of the operating system. For me, the update is really defined by inconsistent rollout and, missed opportunities. It suggests a continued internal prioritization of minor interface tweaks over a complete sort of design evolution.
Well, my stance centers on the profound functional improvements delivered here. The immediate star feature, I think we can agree, is the overhaul of the sleep score algorithm. And this wasn't just a minor bug, it was a fundamental flaw. Users with genuinely interrupted or, insufficient sleep, let's say 6 hours while caring for a newborn, for example, were routinely receiving excellent scores, high 90s even. That failure just diminished the trust and the utility of the Apple Watch for sleep tracking entirely.
Oh, I completely agree. The prior inaccuracy was severe, yeah. And for those of us who rely on that data for, any level of performance tracking, getting a high score when you know your sleep was poor was, frankly, it was almost insulting.
Precisely. And this fix goes far beyond just a simple algorithm tweak. This update revamps the methodology. It shifts the verbiage from subjective things like excellent to more objective terms like very high. And crucially, it retroactively applies this new, more rigorous scoring methodology to years of existing user data. Now, that data migration, ensuring integrity across multiple devices and OS versions, that elevates this from a simple bug fix to, I'd argue, an architectural achievement that really restores trust across the entire health platform.
That's a strong point, I'll grant you, regarding the complexity of that retroactive application. However, moving away from health metrics for a second, this utility argument starts to fray a bit when you look at design and integration. I just don't buy that the overall package is fundamentally utilitarian. I mean, many changes focus squarely on the cosmetic, or worse, they're implemented incompletely. Look at the lock screen, for instance. We get this liquid glass slider, allowing users to adjust the opacity of the clock's effect. Okay, optionality is generally good, but why spend development time on a highly granular slider for just one specific visual component?
I can see why you feel that visual elements are being prioritized, but let me quickly connect the utility thread across the system here. This update profoundly affects how we actually use the iPad every single day. Take the podcast application. It sees major workflow improvements, automatic chapter creation, the ability to see mentions of other podcasts directly in the transcript, quick access to links and sponsors. These are huge gains for consuming complex content. It saves listeners time, boosts creator engagement.
Okay, those are nice to have features, certainly, but I wouldn't call them foundational OS fixes. They're app-level tweaks.
I see them as productivity boosters, and so is the enhanced news application on the iPad. It's far more functional now. It has a redesigned top bar and sidebar, making search and navigation much easier with dedicated sections for things like puzzles, business, politics. When you pair those core app enhancements with critical fixes like the sleep score, I think you have a meaningful package of real, practical gains.
You focus on productivity gains, but the reminders failure really demonstrates a breakdown in the most basic cross-device integration for a foundational utility app. This new reminders feature lets you mark a task as urgent, right? Which should trigger an alarm when the due time hits. Yet this alarm is confirmed to activate only on the iPhone, completely bypassing the iPad even if you are actively using the tablet where you set the reminder in the first place.
That is a fair critique of feature completeness, yes. And we absolutely need to address that cross-device cohesion. But let's just solidify the largest utility gain first, the sleep score fix. You frame it as Apple playing catch-up, fixing something that was fundamentally broken in 26.1. I concede the feature was severely broken before, but when an engineering team undertakes this massive project of rewriting a core algorithm and migrating historical data accurately, shouldn't we view that as a powerful investment in reliability? It's an assurance, really, that the foundation we build the rest of the health ecosystem on is finally trustworthy.
We view it as paying technical debt. I mean, when a core metric gives you fundamentally misleading data, you are compelled to fix it. We can't really celebrate a company for finally restoring basic functionality that should have been there. And besides, the real test of efficacy, the actual consistency under real-world stress, is still months away. A beta 1, especially one this large, is inherently unstable. We need sustained, long-term performance across the ecosystem before we can label it a true success story.
I agree we need stability, but the architectural commitment seems undeniable to me. Now, let's tackle your point on misplaced priorities, specifically that liquid glass slider. You argue this minor aesthetic tweak epitomizes wasted effort when maybe a monolithic system-wide overhaul of transparency is what users actually want. I'm not entirely convinced by that line of reasoning. Granular optionality can itself be a functional improvement.
But why isn't a system-wide slider necessary then? Monolithic system changes often lead to superior design consistency, and that consistency is also a form of utility, right? If I find the liquid glass distracting, or maybe I wish to reduce system-wide transparency for readability or even battery conservation, a single slider for just the clock face is, well, it's utterly useless. It feels like Apple's different internal design teams are kind of working in silos, each delivering a fragmented piece of the customization puzzle rather than unifying the visual language across the board.
That's an interesting structural critique of Apple's development process, perhaps. However, personalization, especially at a granular level, is often a step toward better accessibility for different user needs. And to further counter your cosmetic-only claim, this release does include deeply substantive functional additions that benefit specific user groups. We see the inclusion of tables in the Freeform app that's a critical structural feature users desperately needed for organizational purposes.
Okay, tables in Freeform are welcome. Fair point.
And look at accessibility. The option to have the screen flash for alerts, not just relying on the physical LED on the back of the device. These are highly specific, meaningful, practical gains that enhance the core experience for users with particular needs. These additions demonstrate that functionality is absolutely being prioritized alongside visual optionality.
I accept that Freeform tables and the accessibility flash are genuine utility additions, yes, but they feel like relatively small patches in the face of this major cross-device fragmentation issue. Let's get back to reminders. The iPad is meant to be a robust, independent device capable of managing scheduling and alerts. Why does an 8GB iPadOS update require me to rely on my iPhone just to receive the alarm when an urgent reminder is due on the very tablet I'm using? That dependency severely undermines the iPad's claim to standalone functionality.
I see why you find that dependency frustrating, and ideally, it shouldn't happen. However, we also have to consider the engineering bandwidth constraints and the hierarchy of priorities within this beta cycle. When Apple is simultaneously addressing major complex regulatory mandates like the expansion of AirPods live translation and necessary architectural changes to comply with the EU's Digital Markets Act, the DMA, which demands greater interoperability and access, well, difficult, large-scale engineering has to take precedence sometimes.
DMA compliance is necessary, yes, But that sounds a bit like an excuse for a lack of polish in a major foundational utility feature. The complexity of regulatory compliance shouldn't fundamentally break the expected utility of core apps like reminders on the iPad itself.
Well, I would argue that sometimes full integration of a new feature might be temporarily stalled due to complex technical dependencies. It's possible, perhaps, that the alarm feature relies on a secure prompt or an architectural component that is currently more reliably activated or integrated into, say, the secure enclave or maybe the U1 chip architecture, which is more consistently present on the current iPhone lineup. These large-scale regulatory and architectural shifts consume tremendous bandwidth, meaning smaller features might be intentionally staged for full integration in a later release. Can we really fault them for staging a minor feature when they are simultaneously implementing global architectural changes that carry massive legal and financial risk?
We could fault them for calling the iPad an independent computing device while making a core task manager dependent on having an iPhone nearby. If the iPad is truly running a mature operating system, it needs to handle these foundational alerts independently. The technical instability evident in the huge installation requirement and this fragmented feature rollout suggests, to me at least, a lack of confidence in the underlying maturity.
Actually appears pretty sound. The battery performance, even testing on the M4 iPad Pro, seems generally stable across the developer beta, suggesting the major architectural changes underlying the OS haven't fatally compromised core device function. The focus on massive issues like the sleep algorithm and regulatory compliance suggests genuine maturity in tackling difficult engineering problems, even if we see some initial fragmentation in minor features along the way.
But the visible fragmentation, the lock screen slider being a perfect example, alongside the clear necessity to fix foundational flaws like the sleep score, it makes this release feel less like a confident step forward and more like just a collection of disparate fixes that Apple was essentially compelled to deliver.
I maintain that iPadOS 26.2 Beta 1 brings essential functional maturity that users will feel immediately. The overhaul of sleep tracking corrects a core flaw that diminished the entire health ecosystem, and the key workflow enhancements in the podcast and news apps provide meaningful, practical gains. For me, these outweigh the current state of interface fragmentation and demonstrate strong progress toward a more reliable OS overall.
While utility improvements are present, yes, the continued focus on minor visual optionality, combined with the demonstrably incomplete feature execution like the reminders alarm relying on the iPhone, and the large technical footprint, it risks diluting the user experience. This release feels defined by necessary maintenance and inconsistent rollout, failing, I think, to provide the cohesive design leap that the iPad operating system desperately needs at this point.
Well, the debate certainly highlights the persistent tension between substantive, behind-the-scenes engineering fixes and the user-facing demand for complete and consistent design evolution. Listeners will have to weigh the value of these immediate, reliable utility improvements against the perceived incompleteness and fragmentation of the overall OS direction. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.